the light that fades. Gandalf the Grey had seen many things in his long life. Wars fought over ancient kingdoms, the rise and fall of empires, and the battle against the greatest darkness Middle-earth had ever known. Yet, despite all his victories, there was one thing he feared above all else. It was not Sauron, nor the legions of orcs that had swept across the land. No, Gandalf feared the loss of light, the dimming of the flame that had guided him through countless trials. His greatest dream, one he held deep within his heart, was to always remain the bearer of that light, to never falter, to never allow the shadows to consume him or those he swore to protect. But as time passed, a terrible truth began to gnaw at him. Nothing could burn forever, not even the brightest flame. The realization had come to him slowly, like the setting sun over the misty mountains. It began with small things, the weariness in his bones, the moments of doubt that crept into his mind. For years, Gandalf had pushed these thoughts aside, telling himself that his strength was eternal, that his fire would never fade. But the truth was inescapable. One evening, Gandalf stood at the edge of a cliff overlooking the Shire. The sky was painted in hues of red and gold as the sun dipped below the horizon. He watched the small lights of hobbit homes twinkle in the distance, but even the warmth of the Shire could not chase away the growing darkness within him. "Is this what it feels like?" Gandalf murmured to himself. "The end of light?" As if in response, a chill wind swept across the land, and with it came a whisper, a voice soft and insidious. "Gandalf." The wizard's heart quickened, his hand instinctively gripping his staff. He turned, but there was no one there, just the endless stretch of rolling hills and the distant mountains. But the voice persisted, growing louder, more certain. "Gandalf, your light is fading." Gandalf narrowed his eyes, scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. But there was none, only the voice that echoed in his mind, a voice that seemed to come from within his very soul. "You cannot fight it," the voice whispered. "The darkness will consume you, as it consumes all things." In the days that followed, Gandalf could not shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He traveled to Rivendell, hoping to find solace among the elves, but even there, the whispers followed him. The halls of Elrond's great house, once filled with light and music, now felt cold and empty. And every time Gandalf closed his eyes, he saw the flickering flame of his own power, growing weaker, dimmer. "You are the flame," the voice whispered, haunting him at every turn. "But even the greatest fire burns out." Gandalf tried to ignore it, focusing on his duties, guiding those who still sought his counsel. But with each passing day, the weight of the voice grew heavier, and the shadows around him seemed to lengthen. He began to doubt himself, to question whether the light he carried could truly withstand the encroaching darkness. One night, as he sat alone by the hearth in Rivendell, the voice returned, stronger, more insistent than ever before. "You cannot escape the truth, Gandalf. The darkness is coming for you. Your light will fail." Gandalf clenched his staff, his knuckles white with the force of his grip. "I have faced darkness before," he said, his voice steady but strained. "I will not fall to it now." The voice laughed, a cold and hollow sound. "This is not a darkness you can fight. It is the end of all things. The end of your light." Gandalf's fear grew as the days turned into weeks. He traveled to the far corners of Middle-earth, seeking answers, searching for anything that might prove the voice wrong. But everywhere he went, he was met with the same sense of dread, the same creeping shadows that seemed to follow him wherever he went. In the forests of Lothlorien, Galadriel sensed his unease. She met him by the mirror, her eyes filled with a knowing sadness. "The flame you carry has burned brighter and longer than any could have hoped," she said softly. "But even the brightest flame must fade, Gandalf." Gandalf's heart sank. "Is there nothing I can do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Galadriel looked into the mirror, her expression somber. "All things must end, even the light. You've known this, deep down." For the first time in centuries, Gandalf felt truly afraid, not of death, but of something worse. Of becoming nothing, of the darkness swallowing him whole, leaving no trace of the light he had carried for so long. The final confrontation came on a stormy night as Gandalf stood alone on the slopes of Mount Doom. The wind howled through the mountains, carrying with it the scent of ash and fire. The ground trembled beneath his feet, and the sky was black with storm clouds. But the voice was louder than ever, swirling around him like a vicious wind. "Your time has come, Gandalf. The light will fade, and the darkness will take its place." Gandalf raised his staff, summoning the last of his strength. "I am the flame," he shouted into the storm, "and I will not be extinguished." But even as he spoke the words, he could feel it, the dimming of his power, the coldness creeping into his bones. The light that had burned within him for so long was flickering, and no matter how hard he tried, he could not stop it. The voice laughed, cruel and mocking. "You cannot fight the end, Gandalf. The light will always give way to the darkness." Gandalf's staff glowed faintly, the last remnants of his power struggling against the encroaching shadow. But it was not enough. The darkness surged forward, engulfing him in its cold embrace. And in that moment, Gandalf understood the terrible truth. The light had always been fleeting. No matter how brightly it burned, it could never last. And now, as the shadows closed in around him, he knew that his time had come. As the last flicker of light faded from his staff, Gandalf's final thought was not of fear, but of acceptance. The darkness would take him, as it took all things in the end.